A very good afternoon. So today we are going to start with Walt Whitman's "Oh Captain, My Captain." So yesterday we have learned about um, the previous unit, which was about the Psalm of Life. If you remember, a Psalm of Life, which was written by H.W. Longfellow. Now, today we want to talk about Walt Whitman. Okay, and we've also done our introduction of Walt Whitman yesterday, and after which we're going to start with "Oh Captain, My Captain." Right? So this is one of the most, a poem which has an emotional tone to it, where he wrote this poem in 1865 as an elegy for President Abraham Lincoln shortly after Lincoln was assassinated at the end of the American Civil War. The poem reflects the nation's shock and grief, and Whitman's personal admiration for Lincoln, whom he saw as a great leader and symbol of unity. Now, although Whitman is known for free verse, this poem is more traditional in structure to make it widely accessible and emotionally impactful for the mourning public. So, this poem is a metaphorical tribute to Lincoln, the captain who represents Lincoln, because this is a kind of a metaphorical poem. I mean, you literally see it in a different format as a ship and and sailors on the board, and the ship is about to reach the shores and so on. So there's a lot of symbolic elements which stand for a metaphorical kind of a thing for this poem. Okay, so the captain here of the ship represents Lincoln, and the ship symbolizes the United States, and the fearful trip is the Civil War. So there was that's the background of it. I mean, there was a civil war which was going on between blacks and whites, and and he was actually fighting for Abraham Lincoln for this emancipation of this color discrimination, and hence he wants to say that the fearful trip is the Civil War, and the ship has safely returned to port. What does it symbolize? It symbolizes victory and the end of war. But tragically, the captain has died. The captain who fought is no more, right? And the speaker is torn between celebrating the nation's survival and mourning the loss of its leader. Here, the speaker is like, he's in at conflict. There's like, cannot make any sort of choice between these two, which are quite dear to him. That's like, celebrating the victory or mourning the loss of its leader. So the entire poem comprises the same. Right. Okay, let us quickly look into the summary part of it in detail. The poem was written by Walt Whitman after President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated during the American Civil War. It's an extended metaphor intended to honor Abraham Lincoln's life and contributions for the United States of America. It is essentially the theme of patriotism towards which Walt Whitman tries to draw the attention of the readers. Now, the captain in the poem represents the assassinated president. The ship represents the war-weathered nation following the Civil War. And the prize represents the Union of the States. The speaker is torn between relief and despair, captures America's confusion at the end of the Civil War. And it is the ambiguity that he expresses, a moral conflict whether to celebrate the victory of the Civil War or to lament the death of his leader. Okay, or and the tone in the first half of the poem is joyful and celebratory. Eventually, the tone shifts into a depressed and heartbroken one. Also known as the father of free verse, the poet follows a particular rhyme scheme that perpetuates the deep emotions associated with it. His usage of the phrase fallen cold and dead towards the end of each stanza displays the melancholic tone buried deep in his heart. The speaker is confused between his personal feelings of loss, the death of his captain, and the celebratory mood resulting from the successful voyage. Now, while the Civil War claimed many lives, Whitman believed in the reunification of the northern and southern states of America for the greater cause of the nation. Apparently, a wavering of emotions is well displayed, and his inner thoughts set him apart from the crowd as he tries to reconcile his emotional reaction to the captain's death. His leader's assassination struck him deeply, a display of Whitman's vested interest in the path that a powerful leader takes the country and its people. It was a time of many conflicting sentiments, and Whitman immortalizes this sense of uncertainty, juxtaposing his feelings of mourning and pride in "O Captain, my Captain." The poem is an elegy. Please remember, this is an example for an elegy written in a formal format to add to the solemnity of the context. It is the voice of the general public of America that commemorates the end of a historic war. Right. Coming to the theme of this. So, as we all know, it was like we could realize by reading the summary of the poem that it was grief and mourning. So, the central theme is sorrow over the loss of a beloved leader, Abraham Lincoln, who was assassinated shortly after the Civil War ended. Then the next theme, what you can see in this is victory and loss. Okay, so there is a strong contrast between national success and personal grief. The nation celebrates, but the speaker mourns. Okay, so it's like a kind of a two different contradicting things like victory and loss. Now, leadership and sacrifice. So the captain represents leadership, and the idea that true leaders may not live to see the rewards of their efforts. Okay, they have to somewhere sacrifice themselves for achieving certain goals. Okay, it mentions that. Right. Now look at the tone of this poem. Oh Captain, my Captain. So it's an elegiac and reverent. The poem is a public lament, paying tribute to Lincoln with great respect. A bittersweet. It mixes triumph with sadness. Victory is overshadowed by personal loss, isn't it? So, I mean, it's like he was torn between these two things. So, it's kind of a bittersweet and emotional and passionate. The speaker's grief is heartfelt and intense, moving from shock to sorrow to solemnity. Right. Next, coming to the imagery of this poem. Right. So, we get to see maritime imagery. So, the ship, the voyage, the harbor, they're all indicating metaphorically. Uh, it's like, something to do with the sea and connected with the maritime. Okay. And celebratory imagery. Right. So, what does this mean? So, it's like bells ringing, crowds cheering, flags flying. These show public celebration. So, these are some of the imageries which you find it to show the celebration. Next, it is death imagery. So, what are the things where you can visualize death? The imagery is like cold and dead. Lips are pale, fallen. Now, these bring a stark visual of death, enhancing the emotional weight. Okay, so contrast the joyous arrival of the ship versus the still body of the captain creates a poignant visual and emotional contrast. Okay. The next we are moving on to unit 10, where we are going to talk about Robert Frost and J.M. Langston Hughes. Right. So to start with, let us quickly take the introduction of Robert Frost. The poets who are taken in 10th unit are Robert Frost and J.M. Langston Hughes. Now, it's again a poem of two American poets, and here also in this poem, we get to learn a bit about the poetical devices such as metaphor, allegory, symbolism, personification, and so on. Okay, so now we were actually doing with the American poetry, but this unit will introduce us to Afro American literature. Okay, so one of the most anthologized poets uh, is the Robert Frost poem Mending Wall. That is what we are going to discuss in today's poem, which is prescribed for by Robert Frost, written by Robert Frost. And there is another poem in this unit, I too, okay, and which is one of the finest poems of Langston Hughes. And he calls himself a darker brother in this, okay. And this unit usually kind of, arouses or raises certain pertinent questions about the issues of identity. Right. Let us quickly look into the introduction of Robert Frost. Robert Frost was born on March 26, 1874 in San Francisco. So one of the most celebrated poets in America. Frost is an author of universal themes, yet a modern poet in his adherence to simple language. Now, his work was highly associated to rural life in New England. He often uses simple yet important issues to explore complicated philosophical and social themes. Now, he received 4 Pulitzer Prizes for his poems. At 20, he married Eleanor Miriam White and was a Harvard from 1897 to 1899. He was a teacher, he was a cobbler, editor, and finally a farmer for 11 years in New Hampshire. His first book of verse, A Boy's Will, was followed by North of Boston, and in 1915 he returned to the United States where he was famous and became professor of poetry at Harvard. He received the Medal of the American Academy of Art and Letters in 1933 and the Poetry Society of America in 1941. Over the course of his career, he became popular for poems involving interplay of voices such as Death of the Hired Man or dramas. A few of his popular and short poems include Mending Wall, Directive, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, The Road Not Taken, Nothing Gold Can Stay, Fire and Ice, After Apple Picking, Birches. And the poem Mending Wall, written in blank verse, describes one of the most common experiences in a farmer's life. Every farmer wants to keep the walls, protecting his farm in good shape. The poet believes in universal brotherhood and he believes in universal brotherhood, okay, and says that nature does not want man to build walls to divide him from his neighbors. So this is what is not accepted by the nature, isn't it? So but eventually experience has taught man that good fences make good neighbors. So the language used in the poem is simple and the style incorporates common speech. The poet uses the dramatic monologue to discuss a theme so important and applicable to all times. From a common experience, the poet expounds a philosophy of coexistence and love. I mean, that is what the speaker believes in, a coexistence and love, and it's in the form of a dramatic monologue. And we all know we've done it earlier also for the last Duchess. What is a dramatic monologue? Where you see one speaker and there is a listener too, but his presence is not felt because he is just a mute listener, right? Anything is told is only narrated by the speaker alone, and most of the time we understand his nature and uh, the idea behind his talk only by his talk. Okay, so let us quickly move on to the poem Mending Wall. Okay, so here now this poem is a narrative about two neighbors who meet each year to repair the wall that separates their properties. The speaker is skeptical about the need for the wall, noticing how nature itself keeps breaking it down through freezing and thawing or even animals. But still, the neighbor insists on the tradition, repeating the saying, good fences make good neighbors. So the speaker here questions his belief, arguing there's no real need for the wall, especially where there are no livestock or threats, just trees. So, but the neighbor sticks to what his father told him, valuing custom over logic. Right. Now, the poem, here it goes, the summary. Now, this poem is written and built upon a relationship with his neighbor, a French Canadian in New Hampshire. And the poem discusses contrasting ideologies through two rural neighbors who on a spring day happen to walk along the wall that separates their properties. Now, the speaker in the opening lines talks about the inconvenience of having a wall. He is a progressive individual and questions the need for such a barrier. He says, something there is that doesn't love a wall, the frozen ground, the hunters, the yelping dogs do not keep the wall intact. It becomes a great deal for the speaker and his neighbor to balance the boulders so that the wall is in place. Walls create barriers, the speaker says, and questions what is it they are trying to separate and secure. Their fields are different, and also there are no enemies around. But still, then, why this wall? Right? The neighbor, on the other hand, of a conventional mindset, seems to want the wall prominent in its place. He is also keen on getting it repaired incessantly. Now, as Robert Frost refers to the countryside background, the wall, a boundary for securing the farm and the livestock, is symbolic of a barrier between humans to refrain from individual togetherness. But his neighbor believes in distance. He is one of the belief that good fences make good neighbors. Whatever reasons the speaker gives, he pays no heed. He continues with the age old dictum of having the wall. The word mending in the title of the poem, when taken as an adjective, may also refer to a distinguished relationship the speaker and his neighbor share, which they are trying to mend. Hence, the barrier may be physical or psychological. He also says that his apple trees won't cross the neighbor's pine trees, and hence the wall is not needed. But metaphorically, the poet insinuates that each individual is unique, and having a barrier would only widen the differences. However, the poet introduces an element of subjectivity here. Both the ideologies, a world without barriers, promotes social coexistence and harmony, while a world with a wall entails individuality. From the um, canon of tradition versus modern, the poet tries to bring forth the dispute between the young who try to tear down the ideals of the old, while the old is keen on clinging to the age old beliefs and traditions. Right. Now let us look into the theme of this poem. What is the theme here? Tradition versus change. The poem contrasts the blind following of tradition, the neighbor. So here we see the theme. The poem contrasts the blind following of tradition, the neighbor with the questioning spirit, and boundaries in human relationships. It explores how physical boundaries reflect emotional or social ones, sometimes necessary, sometimes limiting. Nature versus human effort. Nature seems to resist the wall, suggesting that barriers are unnatural and that human impose divisions where they aren't needed. Coming to the tone, okay, which is very playful and reflective. The speaker teases and questions the purpose of the wall in a thoughtful, almost mischievous tone, right? Because the speaker is quite against to having a wall there because it doesn't serve any purpose there, isn't it? So philosophical, the tone is kind of philosophical. There's a deep reflection on human behavior, tradition, and relationships, and it is subtly critical. Okay, while respectful, the speaker critiques the neighbors, unthinking of adherence to tradition. Coming to the imagery. So here, what is the imagery we get to see? It's a natural imagery where Frost uses scenes of the changing seasons, fallen stones, and apple and pine trees to paint a vivid setting, right? Personification. Nature is almost alive. Something that is that doesn't love a wall. Now, he's trying to personify the nature where the nature is dead against of having a wall in between these two neighbors. Now, as if it actively tries to tear down human barriers, right? Then coming to visual imagery, the act of carrying and placing the stones is described in detail, helping readers see the physical effort and symbolic weight of mending the wall. Now, if you take the popular quotes from this poem, okay, I mean, these are some popular lines where, it's been repeated in most and been mentioned in most of the times and most of the occasions. Something there is that doesn't love a wall that sends the frozen ground swell under it. Okay, so this is the opening line repeated later in the poem. What does it do? It personifies nature as opposing walls, suggesting that divisions are unnatural and destined to fall apart. Next, good fences make good neighbors. So this line is repeated by the neighbor. Now, this is a sentence which is being spoken by the neighbor. He believes in maintaining boundaries out of habit and tradition because that is what he's been told by his father. So here the logic doesn't work for him. He goes with the habit and according to his custom and tradition, he wants to have a wall. And the speaker challenges the idea, his idea that implying that understanding and openness might be more important than separation. Right. So here, there we have some more time. So probably we can look into the introduction of the next poet, Langston Hughes. So I've already told you before this that we are also looking into the African American literature also. Okay. So here, J. M. Langston Hughes, that is James Mercer Langston Hughes, an American poet, is considered one of the earliest innovators of the new literary art form called jazz poetry. And he is a novelist, playwright, short story writer, columnist, also popular for his blues poetry. He is a popular leader of the Harlem Renaissance. So the jazz poetry, we just spoke about, is a famous feature of this Harlem Renaissance. And the first to join the musicians in the late 1930s to popularize the movement, the Harlem Renaissance movement. Okay, and Hughes and his fellows tried to depict the low life of the African Americans in their art. They resisted very vehemently the divisions and prejudices based on color within the black community. Langston Hughes wrote The Negro Artist and The Racial Mountain, published in The Nation in 1926, which is widely known to have become their manifestation. And he had the distinction of being elected as the class poet in high school. He had the experience of taking up various odd jobs such as crewman, personal assistant, and busboy. He joined Lincoln University from where he got his BA degree in 1929. He spent much of his life in Harlem, writing poetry and fiction that portrayed the lives of the working class blacks in America. He portrayed life as full of struggle and hardships, combined with joy, laughter, and music. He publicly confronted racial stereotypes, protested social conditions, and tried to give a better stance to the image of the African Americans. He became popularly known as People's Poet, uniting people of African descent across the globe to encourage pride in their diverse Black folk culture and Black aesthetic. The poem I Too is an invocation by Hughes as he expresses his belief that African Americans are a valuable part of the country's population and that he foresees a racially equal society in the near future. It is believed by many critics that the poem is an unofficial response to the popular patriotic poem by Walt Whitman, I Hear America Singing. Right. So, in Whitman's poem, a variety of Americans sing in harmony about America based on a similar theme. So, Hughes suggests that though the circumstances are different for African Americans, they also deserve to experience patriotism. The poem and its simple 18 lines capture a series of intertwined themes about the relationship of African Americans to the majority culture and society. So here, this poem is about, and let me talk about this I too by Langston Hughes. So again, this is an poem which can be written under African American literature, right? So when you look into this poem, or just a brief description about it, it's about a Black American who says that he's a part of America too, even though he's often treated unfairly. Now, right now, he's pushed aside and not allowed to be seen, like being sent to eat in the kitchen when guests come, but he doesn't get angry. He grows stronger and believes that one day he will be treated equally and proudly sit at the table with everyone else. He ends by saying that people will see how beautiful and worthy he is because he too is America. Okay, so it's just a kind of a simple poem, right? So it's just a simple poem written in free verse by Langston Hughes that promulgates the voice of the African American, and although written in a very plain language. Okay, I think there are hardly 2 minutes left, so I will take up this in the next class. Okay, so I'll give you a details a summary of this along with the imagery, along with the theme and tone. So I want you all to go home and just sit back and go through the textbook, read all the notes whenever you are attending the session. Right. Okay. That's it for today.